She had saved empires before, pulled corporations back from the brink with nothing but a laptop and ruthless clarity. But when Dan Ashford fell to his knees in her tiny apartment at 2 in the morning, his $7 billion fortune crumbling like ash between his fingers, Iris Chen realized she had never saved a man who would refuse to let her walk away. The call came at 1:47 a.m. on a Thursday that would split Iris Chen's life into before and after. She was 3 days into a forensic audit for a mid-tier pharmaceutical company, her studio apartment a war zone of spreadsheets and cold coffee, when her phone screamed against the silence. The number was blocked. She almost didn't answer. Iris Chen. Her voice was flat, professional, the same tone she used when collections called about her mother's medical bills. "I need you." The voice on the other end was ragged, stripped of the confidence she'd heard in a TED Talk 6 months ago. Dan Ashford. The Dan Ashford. The man Forbes called the Midas philosopher, who turned a failing tech startup into a global AI empire before his 30th birthday. "Mr. Ashford, it's nearly 2 in the morning. I know what time it is." A pause. She heard something crack in his voice, something human and terrified. "I know who you are too. You're the forensic accountant who found the Kellerman embezzlement. You saved Triton Industries when everyone said it was over. I need that. I need you." Iris sat up straighter, her pulse quickening despite herself. "What happened?" "Everything." The word came out like a confession. "Can I come to you?" "I can't. My office is compromised. My home is compromised. I don't know who to trust." She should have said no. Should have cited professional boundaries, proper channels, the fact that billionaires don't show up at junior accountants' apartments in the middle of the night unless the world is ending. 1247 Ashland Avenue. 4th floor. "Buzzer's broken, I'll come down." 23 minutes later, Dan Ashford stood in her doorway looking nothing like the man who'd graced magazine covers. His suit jacket was missing. His shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, and his eyes, those sharp, calculating eyes that had stared down investors and senators, were hollow with panic. "They're destroying me," he said, and walked past her like he'd been invited. Iris closed the door, her mind already shifting into the mode that had carried her through her father's abandonment, her mother's illness, every moment life had tried to break her. Analyze. Solve. Survive. Who is they? Dan stood in the center of her small living room, looking absurdly out of place among her thrift store furniture and dying succulent. "My board. My CFO. Maybe all of them. I don't know anymore." He turned to face her, and for the first time, she saw past the legend to the man underneath. 3 days ago, I discovered discrepancies in our quarterly reports. Millions moving through shell companies I never authorized. When I started asking questions, my access was restricted. My own company, Iris. They locked me out of my own empire. She moved to her laptop, already opening encrypted folders. "How bad? If they expose this before I can prove I wasn't involved, I lose everything. The board's meeting in 6 days to call for my removal. They're leaking stories to the press, reckless spending, erratic behavior, financial mismanagement." His laugh was bitter. "I built Ashford AI from nothing. Slept in my car for 8 months while coding the first algorithm. Now they're painting me as the villain in my own story." Iris looked at him then, really looked. Beneath the panic was something else. Loneliness. The kind that came from being worshipped but never known. "Sit down, Mr. Ashford. If you want my help, I need everything. Bank statements, access codes, communication records, every meeting, every decision from the last 6 months." "Dan," he said quietly, sinking onto her second-hand couch. "If you're going to save my life, call me Dan." She nodded once, her fingers already flying across the keyboard. "Then Dan, you need to tell me the truth. All of it. Because if you're lying to me, I walk, and you face this alone." He met her eyes, and something shifted in the air between them. "I've been alone my whole life, Iris. That's not what scares me anymore." "Then what does?" He was quiet for a long moment, watching her work with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "That even if we win, I'll still be alone. That success is all I know how to build." Iris didn't respond. She'd learned young that powerful men said things in the dark they'd never admit in daylight. But as dawn crept through her blinds and Dan fell asleep sitting upright on her couch, his phone clutched in his hand like a lifeline, she realized something that should have terrified her. She wanted to prove him wrong. For 5 days, Iris Chun became a ghost in her own life. She called in sick to her actual job, ignored her mother's texts, and survived on energy drinks and the Thai takeout Dan had delivered at 3-hour intervals. Her apartment transformed into a command center, every surface covered with printouts, sticky notes, and the architecture of a conspiracy so elegant it was almost beautiful. Dan never left. He slept in 2-hour bursts on her couch, showered in her cramped bathroom, and watched her work with the focus of a man witnessing a miracle. On the second day, when she cracked the first shell company and traced it to his CFO's brother-in-law, he'd grabbed her shoulders and kissed her forehead so suddenly she'd frozen. "Sorry," he'd said, stepping back like he'd been burned. Nobody's ever fought for me before." She'd returned to her laptop without responding, but her hands had trembled for 20 minutes. Now, on the 5th night, she finally had it. All of it. "Dan." Her voice was hoarse from disuse. "Come look at this." He was beside her in seconds, smelling like her cheap soap and expensive cologne, a combination that shouldn't have worked but did. She pulled up the master file, a web of transactions that told a story of betrayal so calculated it made her stomach turn. "Your CFO, Richard Voss, has been siphoning funds for 18 months. Small amounts at first, then larger as he got confident. He created 7 shell companies, all registered to addresses that don't exist. The money filtered through them, got cleaned, then landed in offshore accounts." Dan's jaw tightened. "Richard was my college roommate. I trusted him with everything. He knew that." Iris scrolled down, her voice gentler now. "But here's what saves you. 3 months ago, he got sloppy. Started using company resources to cover personal investments. There's an email chain where he discusses framing you if anyone got close to discovering the scheme. And this," she pulled up a video file. "Security footage from your server room. Him accessing your credentials, creating false records under your digital signature." Dan went very still beside her. "This proves I'm innocent. More than that. This proves premeditated fraud and identity theft. You take this to the board meeting tomorrow, Richard goes to prison, and you keep your company." She leaned back, rubbing her burning eyes. "You're not losing your fortune, Dan. You're getting your life back." She expected relief, gratitude, maybe another impulsive forehead kiss. Instead, Dan turned to her with an expression she couldn't name. Something raw and desperate and entirely too intense for a professional relationship. "What if I don't want my old life back?" Iris frowned. "What are you talking about? This is everything you've been fighting for." "No." He shook his head, and suddenly he was gripping her hand, his fingers warm and trembling. "These 5 days, Iris. Living in this tiny apartment, eating takeout on the floor, watching you work until dawn, this is the most alive I've felt in a decade. Do you know what my life actually is? Boardrooms full of people who smile while calculating how to use me. Penthouses that echo. Women who want the Forbes profile, not the man who still has nightmares about being hungry." "Dan. You didn't ask for anything." His voice cracked. "Not once. You didn't want my money or my connections. You just saved me because I asked. Because it was the right thing to do. Do you know how rare that is? How rare you are?" Iris pulled her hand back, her heart hammering. "You're exhausted. You're not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking clearly for the first time in years." He stood abruptly, pacing her small space like a caged thing. "I don't want to go back to that glass tower and pretend I'm fine. I don't want to shake hands with people I can't trust and smile for cameras and go home to silence." He stopped, facing her. "I want this. I want you. You don't know me. I know you take your coffee black because you think adding sugar is wasteful. I know you have nightmares around 4 a.m. and pretend you don't. I know you check your phone every hour waiting for a call from your mother's hospice, and you're terrified but you never let it show. I know you're brilliant and stubborn and you've been invisible your whole life because that's how you survive, but Iris, his voice dropped to something almost pleading. I see you. And I don't want to stop. The words hit her like a physical thing. All her life, she'd been the background character in other people's stories. The accountant who fixed messes. The daughter who paid bills. The woman men looked through on their way to someone more exciting. But Dan was looking at her like she was the only person in the world. This isn't real, she said, hating how her voice shook. This is trauma bonding. Stockholm Syndrome in reverse. You're grateful, not in love. Then give me time to prove you wrong. He stepped closer, not touching, but close enough she could feel the heat of him. Come to the board meeting tomorrow. Stand beside me when I take back my company. And after, when the dust settles and I'm not desperate anymore, let me take you to dinner. A real dinner. Let me show you that this, what I feel, doesn't disappear when the crisis ends. Iris wanted to say no. Every survival instinct she'd honed screamed that men like Dante Ashford didn't fall for women like her outside of fairy tales. That this was a fantasy born of proximity and fear, and it would shatter the moment he returned to his real world. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw something that terrified her more than rejection. She saw hope. One dinner, she heard herself say. After you've had a week back in your actual life. If you still want this, if you still see me the same way when I'm not the hero of your crisis, then we'll talk. Dan's smile was the first genuine one she'd seen from him. I'm going to spend that week counting hours, you know. Don't. She turned back to her laptop, trying to rebuild her professional walls. Spend it remembering who you are. Because I need to know that too. The boardroom on the 47th floor of Ashford Tower was designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a table that could seat 30, and silence so thick it felt like drowning. Iris stood beside Dan, her discount blazer feeling like armor made of paper. Every board member's eyes tracked her like she was a stain on their pristine world. Richard Voss sat at the far end, confident and composed. He'd already been spinning his narrative for days, leaked stories about Dan's erratic behavior, mysterious disappearances, financial recklessness. The man looked like he'd already won. Gentlemen, Ms. Patterson, Dan began, nodding to the sole female board member. His voice was steel-wrapped in silk, the CEO voice Iris had only heard traces of in interviews. Thank you for your patience during this difficult week. I know there have been concerns about my leadership and the financial irregularities discovered in our accounts. Concerns. Richard leaned forward, his smile predatory. Dan, we have evidence of gross mismanagement. Millions unaccounted for. Erratic decisions that put this company at risk. We're here to discuss transition, not excuses. Then let's discuss truth instead. Dan nodded to Iris. Her hands shook as she connected her laptop to the presentation screen, but her voice didn't waver. Years of being underestimated had taught her how to weaponize calm. My name is Iris Chun. I'm a forensic accountant, and for the past 5 days, I've conducted a complete audit of Ashford AI's financial records. She pulled up the first slide, a web of transactions so complex it looked like neural pathways. What you're seeing is an 18-month embezzlement scheme involving 7 shell companies, falsified records, and approximately $43 million in stolen funds. The room erupted. Richard's face went pale, then red. This is absurd, he sputtered. Who is this woman? Where did she come from? Dan, this is exactly the kind of paranoid behavior we've been. The funds, Iris continued, her voice cutting through his protest like a blade, were transferred using Mr. Ashford's digital credentials. Credentials that were accessed illegally on March 14th, June 3rd, and September 22nd. She pulled up the security footage. By Richard Voss. The video played in damning silence. Richard, alone in the server room at 2 a.m. Richard, typing at Dan's private terminal. Richard, downloading files onto an external drive. The offshore accounts, Iris said quietly, are registered to shell companies owned by your brother-in-law, Mr. Voss. The email chain discussing how to frame Mr. Ashford has been turned over to the FBI. They're waiting in the lobby. Richard stood so violently his chair toppled backward. You can't. This is fabricated. Dan is desperate. He's clearly manipulated this woman too. Sit down, Richard. The board chair's voice was ice. Security, please escort Mr. Voss to the authorities waiting downstairs. As security flanked him, Richard's composure finally shattered. He looked at Dan with pure venom. You were supposed to be easy to destroy. Too trusting, too soft. How does it feel, Dan? Knowing your best friend tried to ruin you. Dan's expression didn't change, but Iris felt him tense beside her. It feels like I finally know who my real friends are. Richard's eyes slid to Iris, and his laugh was ugly. Her? You think she cares about you? She's an accountant, Dan. She saved your fortune. That's her job. The moment you're no longer useful. That's enough. Iris surprised herself with a force in her voice. She stepped forward, meeting Richard's gaze. You're wrong about him. And you're wrong about me. But you'll have plenty of time to think about that in a cell. As security led Richard away, the remaining board members erupted in apologies, assurances of loyalty, promises to tighten oversight. Dan handled them with practiced grace, but Iris saw the exhaustion creeping into his shoulders. When the room finally cleared, leaving just the two of them in that vast, cold space, Dan turned to her. You didn't have to defend me. At the end there. Yes, I did. Iris began packing up her laptop, needing something to do with her hands. Because he was wrong. And because, she stopped, the words catching. Because. She looked up at him, this man who'd knelt in her apartment 5 days ago with his world burning, who'd watched her work like she was performing surgery on his soul, who'd somehow seen past every wall she'd built. Because you're not a job to me, Dan. You haven't been since the second night, when you woke up from a nightmare and apologized for taking up space on my couch. Billionaires don't apologize for taking up space. Iris. But Richard was right about one thing. She forced herself to say it. This week was extreme circumstances. Crisis mode. Now you're back in your world, and I'm going back to mine. My apartment with the broken buzzer. My mother's medical bills. My job auditing mid-size companies that'll never know my name. She managed a smile that hurt her face. You don't have to pretend this was more than what it was. Dan crossed the space between them in 3 strides. He didn't grab her, didn't kiss her like this was a movie. He just stood close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his brown eyes. I told you I'd wait a week. To prove this isn't gratitude or trauma or desperation. His voice was rough. But I'm not good at waiting, Iris. So I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Okay. When you look at me, do you see someone you could love? Not the CEO, not the fortune, not the crisis. Just me. The man who sleeps in uncomfortable positions and overthinks everything and apparently can't function without you anymore. Iris felt tears prick her eyes, and she hated it. That's not fair. I know. But I'm asking anyway. She thought about the past 5 days. The way he'd brought her favorite tea without being asked. How he'd listened when she talked about her mother, really listened, like her pain mattered. The moment she'd found him at 4 a.m., reading her battered copy of East of Eden, and he'd looked up with wonder and said, You underlined the same passages I did. Yes, she whispered. I see someone I could love. I already do. That's what terrifies me. Dan's smile was sunrise breaking through storm clouds. Good. Because I'm already there. And I'm not going anywhere. You can't just. People don't fall in love in 5 days, Dan. That's not how this works. Then we'll take it slow. He reached for her hand, tentative, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. We'll do the dinner. And another. And another. You'll meet me in my world, and I'll keep showing up in yours. We'll figure out how a billionaire CEO and a brilliant accountant make this work when the cameras are watching and the pressure's real. His thumb traced circles on her palm. But Iris, I need you to know something. What? That week I promised to wait? I'm still going to wait it. I'm going to spend 7 days proving to you that this isn't a fantasy. I'm going to show you my worst days and my boring routines and the parts of my life that aren't dramatic or romantic. And if at the end, you still want to try this, then I'm yours. Completely. Iris laughed, the sound wet and broken and real. You're really going to make me wait a whole week? I'm a man of my word. He squeezed her hand. Besides, you need time to pack. Pack. His smile turned mischievous. Your apartment is being fumigated. Terrible bedbug situation. Completely unlivable. You'll need to stay somewhere else. I happen to have a guest room. Very professional arrangement. Dan Ashford, did you just fake a bedbug infestation? I would never. His eyes sparkled. But hypothetically, if someone wanted to spend the next week proving they weren't just a crisis mode romantic, having you nearby would be convenient. She should have said no. Should have cited boundaries and common sense and the fact that this was insane. Instead, she said, 1 week. Guest room. And if you're lying about the bedbugs, I'm charging you my consulting rate for every day. Deal. He lifted her hand to his lips, the gesture so gentle it made her chest ache. Thank you, Iris. For saving more than just my fortune. As they left the boardroom together, Iris caught their reflection in the massive windows, a billionaire CEO and an invisible accountant who'd somehow found each other in the wreckage. It shouldn't have worked. But maybe, she thought, the best love stories never did. 7 days later, Dan would propose on her apartment rooftop with a ring he designed himself and a speech that made her cry. 2 months after that, she'd say yes. And every year after, on the anniversary of that 1:47 a.m. phone call, they'd order Thai takeout and work side by side in comfortable silence, remembering the night when everything fell apart and came together at once. Because some fortunes were measured in billions. But the real wealth, they learned, was being truly seen. What's the bravest thing you've ever done for love, or what would you do if you had the chance? Share your story below. Your words matter.